Namaste all, and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Welcome, Sraddhalu. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you, Narad. And
Today
welcome
we
to-
are going to experience examples of Siddhis of power. Should be a very interesting evening.
Yes. A quick recapitulation. We were looking at text from Sri Aurobindo's diary notes in the Record of Yoga, which are largely developed in greater depth in the Synthesis of Yoga. But we've been drawing on the text of the Record of Yoga. And we saw two passages which describe the Siddhis. The first one we read in a few sessions ago. And the second one we have been going in much more detail because he also goes in some depth on each of the Siddhis. The first two were Siddhis of knowledge, which we saw as the Prakamya and Vyapti. And then we saw the Siddhis of power. For those who are not familiar with the Sanskrit terms, it will be easy to recall by the key word associated from other readings. When you say Aishwarya, Ishwara, and Aishwarya. Remember this association, lordship. So Aishwarya represents that working, which is the power where your consciousness, your will acts on objects without the aid of and circumstances, without the aid of physical means. A lordship, a natural lordship on your circumstances. Ishita, and you will associate the word ish with desire. So isha, icha being the root similar to icha. So this would be the spontaneity of a need forming, influencing your circumstances without the lordship, without the exercise of a will. And it happens spontaneously, much more reflective of the heart's need than the mind's directed will. Vashita, and it has the sense of the possession, of control, of domination of a kind. So is the control of an object in its nature, through its nature itself, so that it becomes submissive or receptive or flows in the direction in which you suggest by the spoken word or the thought conveyed or just a suggestion made by various means, sometimes even by a gesture. Once there is an automatic established control of one nature in alignment with another, it produces its effect automatically. But there can be a specialized kind of working, which is by pouring of force into word, into thought, into the suggestion of action, by which the force is transmitted and poured into the circumstances, into a person to give a certain result. This pouring of force is the lower and ordinary siddhi, Sri Aurobindo says, and that's what you see more commonly. Whereas when there is the automatic action of one nature on another, that he calls the supreme or entirely divine siddhi. In practice, most of what you see around you is of the lower kind. And we saw lots of examples last time. And one of its lower workings is in the phenomenon of hypnosis or mesmerism more generally. And we saw many examples. In retrospect, it seems as if many of the examples I gave seem to be of misuse or negative use in some way. But that's only because it seems like that in the normal human experience when somebody dominates or influences another. So today I want to give a few more examples. First, more of this kind, which are used in daily activity and in business particularly. And then something which is more positive and more spiritually oriented in its direction and impact. And then we will also see Sri Aurobindo's descriptions of some of these. So that's the direction in which I intend it. We have also several comments, messages, as well as questions. So I will not want to take up two comments because otherwise we will miss the freshness of the point of these comments. One, you remember the last time before last, I had made a comment of a quotation from Swami Vivekananda, where he says that if you dedicate yourself entirely to a certain idea, where you literally live that in all your parts, day and night, then you will achieve success in it. So Vaibhav has sent the actual quotation, and I will read this from Swami Vivekananda, where he says, "Take up one idea, make that one idea your life, dream of it, think of it, live on that idea. Let the brain, the body, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea. And just leave every other idea alone. This is the way to success. And this is the way great spiritual giants are produced." Interesting. It's not only success in the material world, in material circumstances, but he also connects this to the spiritual outcomes. And if you think about it, it's exactly the same process. It's just where you have directed that energy. And you'll notice in the way he describes it, there are two components. One is the idea taken in with which you identify fully in all the parts of your consciousness. So make that idea your life, dream of it, think of it, live on that idea, brain, body, muscle, nerves, every part of the body being full of the idea. So you are turning your mind, emotions, life energies to the idea, dwelling to identify, but also soaking in and imprinting the idea in your physical consciousness and in your physical body, so that even in your actions, you're steeped, suffused with that idea materially. So there's a full identification. And then the second aspect to it, which is as if the complementing aspect, and just leave every other idea alone. So you disconnect from all else. You're only full of this one idea. Disconnect from all else. You'll see how this relates to a discussion we had, again, at that time, 2 sessions ago, where I'd highlighted the necessity of bringing alignment in all the parts of your consciousness to that one outcome. I think we were discussing this in the context of the prakamya, where you are trying to exercise a certain perception, or in the action of the Aishwarya, where you're trying to extend your will to a particular outcome. The problem we find in our consciousness is each piece has a different direction, different purpose, and mostly it is fickle, unconcentrated, not aligned. And often when we make a wish, or we hold a certain intention, or we work to a particular outcome, there are parts which are even opposing in the very act of your effort. Or there are parts which are questioning, doubting, looking at other options. What if I should have done that? Am I sure that I want to commit to this? So the fragmentation of your will in many different directions weakens what would be otherwise a very natural outcome of the pressure of the tapas. You remember in the description of Aishwarya, Sri Aurobindo writes, Aishwarya is the effectiveness of the will acting on the object or event without aid of physical means, by pressure of tapas, of the chaitanya, of the consciousness, straight on the object or on the nature or on the circumstances, whatever. But it's the pressure of the consciousness, intensified, concentrated. If you have many different directions, obviously you don't have the fullness of the pressure or one-pointedness of the pressure. And often you have multiple results on which you are concentrated, which may then actually lead to a fragmentation in the results. So you see in the quotation from Swami Vivekananda how he makes this one-pointedness to be full of that idea, but leave every other idea alone, so that there is no part of you which is distracted or fragmented in consciousness. And this is the way to success. Now, in the way you may define the word success, it could be material, it could be psychological, but it could also be spiritual. And so this is the way great spiritual giants are produced. When that particular idea is in the spiritual direction, it leads to a spiritual realization. When it's to a material or psychological direction, it leads to the accomplishment or the realization of that. But you see, if you look abstracted to the psychological principle behind, it's the same everywhere. There's another quotation which Maya has shared from Kapali Shastriyar, which was in a reference to the last question of last time about the use of power or um, fear or misuse of it. And Kapali Shastriyar writes, the one aim of the seeker must be to achieve a constant Jyotir Leela, play of light within. The Shakti Leela, that is the play of power, may follow afterwards. He does not worry whether this play of power is there or not, once the uninterrupted reign of the light is aglow within. So the light here is the knowledge aspect. You build the knowledge aspect without worrying too much about the power, and the power aspect will naturally flow through as and when it develops. So he says, concentrate towards this end and do all that helps this dawn of knowledge, Jnanodaya. Udaya is dawning, Jnana, knowledge. So the dawn of knowledge. The growth in consciousness, in awareness, in the quality of consciousness, in the knowledge of consciousness, and if it takes on the natural form of the Siddhis, it would correspond to the Vyapti and Prakamya aspects of the Siddhis. Dwell on these, and then the power aspect automatically will follow as the consciousness and the power aspect of consciousness begins to fill. So this is another useful guideline and helpful for all. I want to take a few examples which are quite stunning also from on a very material level. And as I said last time, particularly when we come to the Siddhi of Prakamya, where you are deliberate, the Siddhi of Vashita, where you are exercising a power of control over circumstances or an individual to bring it into submission or make it receptive to your suggestion, etc. Anybody who has a strong vitality tends to exercise this anyway, unconsciously generally. Some become conscious over time that they are able to exercise this will. They don't know how they do it. They feel, they sense, and then they will it, and then it happens. So somebody shared with me this incident when, as a student, he would be in class. After a while, he would get bored. He would identify some individual on the front benches because he was behind. And then he would start concentrating on the person with a certain intention that the person should do something. And generally, after a few minutes, the person would actually end up doing it. He would pick some very odd things, and whatever he picked, generally the person would tend to do. So it was quite obvious that it was the result of that concentration. Now, what did he do with it? Well, he just played with it, that's all. But you'll notice all of us have this power, and you can do this as an experiment. Take a position which is, let's say, 1 floor above on a balcony or 2 floors above, where you're not directly on the line of sight of people who are on the road, let's say. So from above, you look, pick any person at random. Pay attention to that person, and as Swami Vivekananda describes the focusing of concentration, you don't have to take it to that degree, but the gathered awareness centered on that person with the idea or intention that the person should turn and look at you. Now, if you were on the same level on the ground floor on the road, then perhaps the person turns and sees you. It could be by chance. But when you're above, that's not within someone's line of sight. So you even pick someone who's looking another way. You focus on that, hold that intention, play with it, and you'll notice there's a point where you feel the person's consciousness, and you can feel as if your intention now joins the person's consciousness. And at that moment, the person will either look around hesitatingly, or in most cases, simply turn and look straight at you. Turn up and look like that. They're looking here, they'll turn around and look straight at you. It's almost as if it's not the person is sensing, oh, who is this? And I'm looking around who it is. They look straight at you straight away. Now, this is done so easily. Children do it all the time. I've seen children in the ashram school, when they had heard that you can do this, they tried it out, it worked. It's actually as simple as this. It doesn't require any special effort. This is the ability of that influence projected. What you do with it then, you may of course develop. But it's as simple as normal, as frequent as this. Only you'll have to be in that moment at one in the objective, the concentration, momentarily, not with special intensity either. Once you play with this and see how easy it is, you will understand what happens with people with strong vitality. And they use this all the time. And then, as I said, in business, as in war, because you're struggling to pull out an advantage against somebody else, there's a collision of interest, collision of wills, collision of objectives. So it's a war, largely on a vital level. There, you always need to exercise this. You cannot be a successful businessman if you do not exercise, to some degree at least, this power of the Vashita in interactions in business. So anybody who's successful in business will have a little bit of this. Then you observe what grade it is that they use. Some people use a crude, low vital energy. Some people use a more refined vital. Some people have a strong mental content, a mental component with a little bit of the vital or even no vital. It can be a purely mental force that evokes a mental response. In some cases, occasionally, the mental turns to an idealism which exceeds its own mental limitations and even as if turns to a spiritual truth, or even becomes a vehicle for a higher spiritual truth to act through that idealism, which is often the case when you see an ideal, for example, serving a larger goal, a larger truth, a larger purpose. And it may be a mental idea, it can have a strong devotional or vital content also, but the turn and direction of it opens to something so wide and large that even a spiritual truth can as if inhabit or fill into it and act partially or more fully. For example, when you see in certain nations the ideal of finding your independence against some oppression or colonization, etc., you see how powerful that can be. One of the best examples would be to look at the Irish history. I think nearly 800 years, the struggle to find their independence, their identity, and a number of people who chose to even lose everything and give up their life for that. And so at that point, when you align yourself to an ideal like this, it's not out of hate for the other. Of course, that may be there on a lower level, but it is to a higher ideal that you give, and then something higher, a higher truth. And the nation soul even can as if fill in, inspire, and guide even, or direct the outcomes. It can unify people across a variety of types, interests, and temperaments, much more than something which is small, low, narrow, petty, etc. So I'm going to give a few examples, though, starting with the small and then growing to the wide. And some of these are quite stunning, and there's nothing to fear. You just understand that this is normal when one becomes conscious of it. And it's not a special skill. It's just exercise of what is already within most people with a strong vital. So I give an example of a person who I know. I was not present when he did it, but I've seen him do other similar things. But a friend of mine rather, was with him when it happened. And when the friend narrated it, they were both with me. So the friend narrated that this person, let's call him X, businessman, told him, I'll show you what I can do. They were sitting in a restaurant in a public space. And he told my friend, look around the restaurant, pick out any person in this restaurant, whoever you want. So in this case, it was a woman. The person chose, looked around a table behind him, behind X. Point to that and that woman. X said, okay. We continued to eat. They were chatting, but he was silent for a while. And he was concentrated. He didn't have to turn and look at her also. He had just seen who it was, and that was enough. After a while, the woman got up, walked next to him, next to his table, next to him, and with a slight detour, then went to the washroom. Came back from the washroom, walked straight up to him, and said to him, I think I've seen you before. Where have we met? And started a conversation. Interesting. It is so amazing. It is so stunning when you think about what was possible. And it's not a big deal. Again, I'm saying it's an ability has been developed, and it's only a vital exercise, vital energy. The same thing I've seen, take another example. This person would, again, they were people, these are all people in the business space because that's where you see it most easily. Um, we were on the road. He pointed to a dog, which he picked at random. The dog was lying down, half asleep. He said, "Watch that dog." And then he concentrated. After a while, the dog woke up, got up, turned around, and straight away looked at this person and started barking. Interesting. Another person I take as an example, also in business, what was characteristic in him was he was doing trades across the world. The nature of his business was international deals. I don't mention the specifics, but he had to call up people across the world, and he had friends in different countries with whom he was trading regularly. And he would call up X. I was sitting next to him, so I could watch very closely what was happening energetically. And he would pour warm, effusive, generous, loving, genuine warmth, vital energy. Now, it would be of a higher vital grade. And the person would be charmed. Of course, they're still doing business. He would ensure that the person with whom he was dealing would get a good deal. Now, he was a broker between two groups. Now, he would call up the other person who had something to sell. This fellow has something to buy. He calls up the fellow who wants to sell. The same warmth, effusive, flowing, gripping, affectionate, genuine, and wants genuine to do good to the seller. And what I saw, which really made him effective, and which is what was the basis of the success, he genuinely wanted both the seller to benefit and the buyer to benefit. Coming in between, of course, he would have his commission. That was his job. But that genuineness of warmth and affection, I found when he exercised it on me, it had the effect on me. And I said, wow, this man is such a wonderful person, even to have a friend. I felt that. But it was vital, but it was the higher vital. It was doing good while he's doing the business. You have to understand, business is not bad. Making money is not a bad thing. It's when you make money where somebody has the experience as if they have lost while you have gained, that something is unbalanced, something is not all right, and does not lead to lasting, trustworthy relationships. The role of the Vaishya, and who does the business, is to create wealth, is to grow in plenitude, in bountifulness, in fullness, increase value, increase prosperity. And it has to operate on the basis of goodwill. All of them are your family, even those with whom you're negotiating. You want everybody to come out of it with good feeling. Each one should be happy. So that feeling when you have and you build on it, the businessman can be extremely successful with lasting long-term relationships. You drop to the lower level, and again, I've given an example of a person who actually used to operate on this level, where his whole exercise was to grip people on the basis of a lower vital attraction. So when he's assessing a person, he was tapping on that level, sensing on that level. When he was building relationships, they would take alcohol or exchange things which brought down the consciousness to be able to connect and build bonds on that level. Or often he would shift into crude sexual jokes, trigger the person, and then build a bond on that level. The result in such cases was that although the bonds were strong in the beginning, they rarely lasted. And over time, he had to keep rebuilding. And the quality of people he got were also narrow, crude, and of that level. The other person who built on larger, genuine, higher vital, affectionate bonds, he built long-term lasting relationships. And sometimes he would call up somebody after 10 years and with the same warmth and effusiveness and make the deal, because the person remembered him with the same affection and warmth, even after 10 years. So it was interesting to observe how that faculty power can operate on different gradations of the vital. But from there, one can move to something still higher. But I'll just give one more example of the way this worked. This is again a businessman who shared with me what he does when he went to a board meeting. He said as he entered the board meeting, he would feel out the entire board, everybody sitting at the table. He's feeling them out. He's already identified this, this, and this. They are the weak people. He's not even seen them fully on the face. He's sensed the weakness of the vitality. He sits down, and then in his consciousness, he focuses on these weak points to get the outcome that he has in mind. So he's intention with people to swing them, and he evokes from them the yes that he wants, and then follows with the rest. It works like that, actually. So I'm giving these as examples of how on the vital level it can operate. You move now to a higher vital, which opens to a spiritual. Let's take an example of this. And I will share a couple of examples that I've seen closely. One was when I was in my, let's say, late 20s. I had not traveled much at that point. I had no particular interest in travel. So occasionally, once a year, I would go for something or other. Not particularly happy about it. So anybody who said, oh, so and so wants you to travel, my starting point was no. So I was working in the ashram archives at that point, and Jayantilal, who was head of the archives, told me, Jaya Mitra from Calcutta, she wants to meet you. I said, no, I don't want to meet her. What about? And she wants to call you to Calcutta. I shook my head. I had decided, no way, I'm not going to accept. So I woke up. I'd never met her before. I'd heard the name. I had no idea who she was. I enter his room, Jayantilal's room, and she was there. As I walk into the room, she was looking out. I'd never met this woman. She turned around, and suddenly I felt this very strong warmth, motherly, affectionate, genuine. And within a moment, she says, Sraddhalu, I want you to come to Calcutta. Will you come? And my heart melts, and I say, yes. This shift was instant. And from that point on, the relationship I had with her was defined from that moment on. It never changed. She was like a motherly figure to me, and I was like a child to her. Even though I was when I was interacting with the students, I was giving talks, etc. But that relationship was set, it never changed. Now, if you look at the way Sri Aurobindo describes this, Vashita acts automatically through established control of one nature by another, or by the pouring of natural force, which is the inferior. So this former, the established control of one nature by another, the supreme or entirely divine Siddhi, that was natural. And the way it set, it seemed right. I moved into her sphere of influence, and I was set into the relationship. It never changed. Interestingly, even after she left her body, that relationship with her continues the same. Interesting. So it was quite remarkable, and I draw upon this because of the extraordinary character. Many times I looked back at that and I said, wow, there's a content of a spiritual force in it. Now, this is what I'm coming to. Strong vital, embracing, genuinely affectionate, but there was a spiritual content to the vital. And it was that light and the spiritual light which allowed for something much larger, more embracing, real and spiritual, obviously, to act, but through the power of the vital energy. Over time, each time that I visited, and I never refused her, each time that I visited for the school and programs, I saw her working with others. I saw how effective she was in getting things done. And it was this continued power and the effectivity that I saw everywhere. And there was a constant opening to the spiritual consciousness which flowed through this higher, refined, very pure, very rich and capable, diverse vital energy. So she was very gifted in music, in dance, in literature, very developed mind and intellect. But the main flow of power was from this higher vital open to the higher spiritual. Her opening to the mother was exceptional also. And so as an instrument of the mother, she was extraordinary. One of the most extraordinary I have seen in my life. So I would put her among the top 3 that I have seen who could be an instrument for the mother's force. And so this is an excellent example. Imagine if she had a weak vital, and with the higher opening, the effectivity in the material world, the ability to gather, to garner, to carry people with her would not have been so great. Hence, the importance of the developed vital turning to the divine consciousness and becoming an instrument and a vehicle for the divine consciousness. So you see here the power of this Vashita operating through the vital, but also with a spiritual force working behind or through it. Now think about what that means for each one of us as we choose to become instruments for the divine. I'm particularly recalling Mother's observation in this context when she says that when you make an offering of yourself to the divine consciousness, if you have not developed your individuality, what is it that you're going to offer? So the first priority, she says, is developing the individuality. But then if you're going to make an offering, a richly developed individual with many capacities, with many faculties, that being offered as an instrument would be far more useful, far more effective for the divine work. Of course, you may start with a less developed or even an undeveloped, but with the full self-giving and a full opening and self-giving, let's say, the working of the force in you and through you would also build and develop that richness far more rapidly than you could with your own capacity. And so this Jayadi was one of those examples where she came with a readiness, but in the infusion of the force, what was done through her was also exceptional and superhuman. One of the examples which I saw, and because there were programs where we went when we went there. In the previous day, she would be directing her teachers, enthusing, filling them with energy to arrange things. So they would arrange the stage for some program, some function. They did what they could, and then it was time. Maybe some of them exceeded the time. Eventually, they had to go back to their homes. They all left. She's left alone. She does the work of 10 people over the next few hours. By the time they came back the next day, the whole setting had been changed dramatically. And then she would give them credit. See what a wonderful job you did. Of course, she did the larger part of it, and she could do that and never be tired. She barely seemed to eat. That's the kind of flow of energy which was there. But with the developed vehicle, you see the power of how this works. But acting on influences, on circumstances, and on people. So one of the things we also saw in her, this ability to gather people around some of the best artists, musicians of India, biggest names, but also most developed in their skills. She had them coming to her place to perform. And in most cases, they did it with no expectation of money, just that as a service. What is it they felt? It was the same thing which I felt, which I experienced, or some variation of it, I suppose. And then, not only that, at some point, she said they were performing in her center, which was not only a school, it was also a center for culture. At Lakshmi's house, I think the mother had named it Lakshmi's House, and Institute of Culture was the name given. So there they had these programs. It became like a hub for some of the elites of Calcutta. And then she had them come to the ashram in Pondicherry, the same biggest names of musicians in India, coming there to offer their service. Now imagine, it's one thing to call one musician who's a big name. She had 10 of them coming over a span of 3 or 4 days, all for free. Or if at least their travel and stay had to be covered, she would approach somebody who would pay for it. And everything would be done by that sheer goodwill that was flowing through her. I'll give one more example. You see how effective such an instrument can be. She said, well, we had Sri Aurobindo's Alipur bomb case, the famous case where Sri Aurobindo was tried in court to be hung eventually if he had lost. And the papers relating to that, we had only the main statement, which was the last closing statement, which is well known. But what about the documentation of the case? So many people had said, well, is it still there? Maybe it's been destroyed. We don't know. Many people had tried over the years. Nobody had ever found it. Now, 100 years have passed almost since the case was over. And Jayadi now goes to the Calcutta High Court and says, I want those papers. Now, anybody, try this. You go and yourself and say, talk to the most senior judge and say, I want those papers. He'll say, sorry, we are too busy. We don't have time. What is this case you're talking of? 100 years old, we are not going to find any papers. We won't even bother looking. That would be a normal response you'll get. She convinces them to look. They look over so many weeks, months, I don't know what. Eventually they come back saying it's not there. What would happen normally? You would have given up, or people would have given up and said, look, we have done it. Don't make us do it again. She goes right back and insists and says, no, let's go ahead and get it. She goes into the court one by one. I don't know what she did exactly. She went through everything. And in the Calcutta High Court, they found one cupboard which was locked, for which the key was lost. Everywhere else they had checked, this was the last cupboard left. She insisted on having it opened. They broke the lock, and inside were all the documents of Sri Aurobindo's Alipur bomb case. And she found it. What an achievement. And with full goodwill and participation of everybody. You cannot do this by normal human supplication, pleading, um, diplomacy, goodwill, etc. There has to be this power which literally seizes upon people and on circumstances and shapes to get the outcome that you want. And so this was one of the very extraordinary examples of this ability, and with a strong spiritual basis. And so you'll see how Sri Aurobindo describes this as the supreme and entirely divine Siddhi, but operating through the vital in this case. When it would be full, it would operate on perhaps all levels. But good example. Another example I want to share, because many of these people were built by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. You came to them, ordinary person or with some potential, let's say, and the working of the mother's force in you literally built your whole capacity. So an example, which is again from the ashram, and for this particular type of power, you have to see people with strong vitality. And one of them was Pranab Kumar Bhattacharya, who was the head of the physical education department. The mother had, at some point after Sri Aurobindo left his body, she had Pranab stay with her as her personal attendant for increasing durations of the day. At one point, he records, the mother said to him, can I draw more of your energy? So she was literally relying on him for a certain energetic support. And he said, mother, you can take all the energy even to the point where I die. That was his way. And she shook her head and said, a mother cannot do that. But what she did was to draw upon that support, which he had a very strong vital. When he first came to the ashram, it seems the mother took him straight to Sri Aurobindo and said, here is the person you were looking for, or something like that. And she explained later to him that they had been looking for somebody who had a very strong vital, but also in whom the psychic being was strong and in the front. And strong vital and physical. And they found that person in him. And of that, again, this is the narration I've heard from what was told to us, that apparently before he came, a year before he came, Sri Aurobindo told the mother, a person will come who will be an instrument of Kali. And his coming will represent the transition of the yoga to the physical level. And mother said to Pranab that he was the person that Sri Aurobindo had spoken of. These are fascinating insights, but what was the outcome of that is that mother used him to build the whole physical education activities of the ashram, the entire physical framework. Now remember, he himself says, I didn't build it. It was built by Udar. I only maintained it. So Udar was the instrument, again, strong vital, but very different type, that mother used to build many institutions. And Udar narrating would tell us that it was a normal routine. Mother would send him to a project to build the project, and then she would take it away from him and transfer it to someone else to manage it. So his job was build and then move on, build and move on. So a lot of the physical education framework of the material resources were built by Udar. The content of it were built by Pranab. And the mother herself would come there. In many cases, if you see the photos, she would walk with Pranab next to her and take a salute from all the students. So she had, you see one of these photos, students standing with their arm like this and salute in a row, both sides. And mother is walking with Pranab in between, taking the salute jointly with him. Now you must understand there's something happening there which is quite extraordinary, which we may not be fully able to appreciate fully because it happens in so many ways. But I'll give a few incidents and examples. You'll get an idea. So there's one lady who was a teacher at that point and a group captain. She had in the physical programs, she had the authority of managing a certain group, a certain age group. And at some point, she had a lot of complaints against Pranab. We'll call her Chitra. So Chitra goes to the mother and starts complaining. Mother listens quietly. At the end of the whole thing, she says to her, and at that point already Pranab used to be with her many hours every day. She said, a person who is with me for so many hours every day cannot make those types of mistakes. And then she told Chitra, I want you to promise that you will obey everything that he asks you to do. That's quite a statement. She made her promise that. And I heard this from, we'll call her Chitra. Chitra says, so to her, after that, I would avoid meeting him because anything he would say, I had to say yes, I had to obey, and I didn't want to do that. So I would avoid meeting him as much as possible. Interesting. But that's the kind of power that she put into him, not only for authority, but for action, for the work. And there are many examples of what she did to build the institution itself, the physical education institution. But I'll share the working of this power of... now you'll see, remember Vyapti and Prakamya were siddhis of knowledge, where Sri Aurobindo described how not only you can perceive, but also you can influence and imprint. And that's when the other two the three siddhis of power can operate. But you will remember in the description that we had read before, let me see if I can find that. So Vyapti, to each form of Prakamya, there is a corresponding form of Vyapti, reception or communication. So you can receive, but also communicate knowledge. Okay. So, and then again, if you remember, I read from the text, it is possible by Vyapti to communicate anything we have in our systems, thoughts, feelings, power, etc., to another. And if he is able to seize and hold, he can make it his own and use it. This can be done either by a sort of physical throwing of the thing in us or into the other, or by a will upon the swabhava, nature, innate nature, compelling it to effect the transfer. The teacher and the guru habitually use this power of Vyapti, which is far more effective than speech or writing, but all men use or suffer it unconsciously. So we have discussed this in great detail in one of the sessions about this. I don't repeat, but I want to give an example of this in relation to Pranab. So when the mother was going to play tennis, she was playing with younger people and mostly often winning, although she was 80 and she's playing with people who are in their 20s. And at some point she tells Pranab, this evening you are going to play with me as my partner. So they're going to play two on each side of the tennis court, and he's going to be mother's partner. And Pranab says, Mother, I have never played tennis in my life. I don't know how to play. And mother said to him, don't worry, I will give you the capacity. So Pranab says, I had no idea what she was talking about, but he trusted her. He had faith. He said, okay, she will do whatever. And very simple faith. He goes to his office, pulls out books on tennis and starts reading and looks at the pictures. This is called forehand stroke. This is called backhand stroke. He takes a racket for the first time in his life. That evening he goes and he stands next to the mother and then he starts playing. And he plays like a skilled person. At the end of the game, many people congratulated him and asked him, well, how long have you been playing? We have never seen you play. And he says it's the first time he played. But all the strokes, the physical movement of the body itself when he is making the stroke, has been infused into his body as if the skill is innate and known in the body consciousness, in the tissue, muscle, nerves, where the instinctive movement are being driven by the imprint that she has transferred in him. This infusion to a physical degree, she could do, she could put, but remember on the other side, if you can receive and make your own, look at Sri Aurobindo phrasing, receive and make your own, then you can have it. You can acquire it as if it's a knowledge that was always there with you, it is yours. That Pranab had the ability. In his physical consciousness, he had the capacity to receive. The mother apparently told him something quite fascinating, which he has recorded in his personal memoirs. And he said, or she said to him, that his body was built particularly for a particular experiment, which was for the action of the supramental force directly on the physical consciousness, bypassing the mind and vital. Now, again, what that means is outside the scope of what our discussion is now. But the idea was that in his physical consciousness, there was an extraordinary receptivity, much more than even in the vital and the mental, which allowed her to infuse things straight in the physical body itself. So there's an example of influence operating in this way. And I will end with just an observation from this, because he had this kind of strong vital, but also the infusion that the mother had put into him. The entire space that he managed, which was the physical education program of the ashram, he held in his consciousness. And you could feel that. If you were sensitive, you could feel that somewhere as you enter the physical grounds, the playground or sports ground or somewhere, you could feel that somewhere this man is in charge. Now, if you're sensitive, you would have known at that time, but the main difference you felt was after he left the body. Then it's as if that charge faded out. And it's interesting, he made this comment a few years before he left his body. He said, once I leave my body, a lot of these things will suddenly dilute and fade out. And in fact, that's what happened, because he was holding the space and he was holding the working of things in that space. How much was it of it was consciously built or not, I don't know. But he was conscious that he was holding, and that much is clear. So he would walk into the space. You knew he was the boss. He was the person who was in charge. But it was held with a certain distinctive power, which maintained a grade of discipline, a grade of standards, which all those who were operating under him as captains were automatically led to maintain. After he left the body, they put some other people in charge who had, but I will have to be accurate, I will say, who had practically nothing, at least in relation to what Pranab had. And you can feel the emptiness. And all these standards and grades rapidly began to fall. Now, this is an example I'm giving of something where you had a person which is in the human domain, but still you had exactly the same thing operating when the mother or Sri Aurobindo held the space of the ashram in their consciousness and held it up. And while in the physical body, it had a grade of physical vibration which one could feel physically. Leaving the physical body, there's a tendency for that grade to tend to drop. Now, I'm using the word very carefully, tend to drop. If you do not participate or if you oppose, there's a tendency for it to drop because there is not the same level of physical constant contact. And this is where you have to observe how the thing works. As long as people would go to the samadhi frequently, that physical base of the power of their influence was still strong. Somewhere around about 25 years ago, let's say around the year 2000, I don't remember the exact year, maybe it was 97, 98, around 2000, let's say. Decision was taken by the management that they will not allow cycles to be placed in front of the ashram. So till then, most of the people in the ashram were using bicycles. And I remember it was common. You had a break in the morning time. Many people would cycle down to the ashram, enter, sit at the samadhi, and then go back to the work. 5-minute break, even 10-minute break, they would do that. But you could do that because you could park your cycle practically at the entrance of the ashram. And I've done that hundreds of times over years. Park there, go in, come out in exactly 2 minutes, go right back, and you were rejuvenated. You held, the connection was built materially. They made this new rule, no parking there. So you had to park your bicycle far away. Meanwhile, tourist cars would come and stop in front because that space had been freed up and it was now filled with tourists. To go in, you had to take a longer walk and then you had to go through the clutter of the tourist. And the result was a dramatic dilution of that physical influence of the samadhi on the ashram community and its spiritual life. With that, there was a rapid drop in standards because this power of holding, and I will actually use this word from the spiritual aspect, the Vashita, which is spiritual, was weakened. And with that, many other problems began to grow, including interpersonal problems, administrative, and other problems. All the problems dramatically increased from the point that this physical link was weakened or even lost. Many stopped going to the ashram. They would go at best once a day because to go at other times was not only difficult and inconvenient, there was a huge pressure of the dilution, which made it almost impossible. You wanted to go to the samadhi, well, it's surrounded by tourists who are gawking around, who have no interest, and you have to navigate through all that. It became really, really difficult and harmful to the spiritual life and integrity of the community. So again, I'm showing you how this power can operate even in other ways, but there are gradations on which the power can operate, and particularly when it can operate on the physical level, it can make a huge difference for holding the physical space and of course the psychological space and the spiritual space, if that be the case, as in the ashram. So Vyapti is one of the chief agents of Vashita. So the ability of the consciousness to now hold within yourself. You will read of the mother speaking of this. She says that until about when the large numbers of families came at the end of the Second World War, until about that time, let's say 1945, she was holding all the sadhakas of the ashram in her consciousness. She felt them in her. She was in them, and she said she was doing the sadhana for them. From the point this large group came, many who were not in the sadhana, it was difficult because now what happens when she's holding the whole collectivity, there's a collective action of her consciousness holding within her. There are people now who are not sadhakas on whom she cannot apply that kind of force and pressure. So she had to drop that whole process. And she said she put a general force of help, and you had to make the effort now to reach out and open to it. And then, of course, the same action would take place. But she could no more continue that way that she was doing earlier. So again, that was one of the transition points where the sadhana itself in the collective consciousness weakened because of this mixture and the shift that she made as a consequence from it. But this description is fascinating because she speaks of holding everybody in her consciousness and doing the sadhana in them. And you see, this is how the Vyapti operates, and through that, the will of her consciousness working, transmitting. And she says the teacher and the guru habitually use this power of Vyapti, far more effective than speech and writing. Now imagine when she had to transmit the ability to play tennis. She could have given instructions through speech, through writing. Far more effective, she imprints just like that, the whole skill, and it's there. The thing still happens. We know of cases of sadhakas who have actually opened themselves to her in a certain way. Even now, recently, after she has left her physical body, and received an imprint of a capacity and been able to exercise it. So it still happens, but most people are not even conscious this is possible. And well, don't make the necessary effort, which is not much. You just have to open and ask and really feel her presence in you and allow her to do that imprinting. But if this is possible with a skill and capacity in the physical, it is equally possible in the vital or in the mental. So one more thing I wanted to share about this. I've spoken of examples of Roman before who had demonstrated so many artistic abilities. And Sri Aurobindo speaks of yoga force. It is again the same thing, imprinted, but the capacity of their consciousness or of the yoga force, which is from the divine, anything can be thus imprinted. In this operation, particularly of the Vashita, which is in its supreme or entirely divine Siddhi, the higher consciousness gets imprinted into the lower. The higher nature begins to form into the lower. And this is essentially the process of the transformation in the sadhana. So I think with that, I will conclude with some of these examples and come to a very general statement. And this is going to be very important to appreciate the nature of the working of Aishwaryam. Remember, this is the lordship and the power working through the will, either directly on the object or on the nature or indirectly on circumstances. And or the fourth one, which is the by pressure of the mere thought that is will of the Lord, of the divine, which Prakriti, nature, automatically obeys. We had discussed this last time in the four gradations. Here I want to bring you a certain insight, which I think is one of the most important things to appreciate, and we will understand why it's called Aishwaryam. Ishvara is the Lord. When he conceives of the universe, he concentrates his energy, his power, to actualize, to realize, to express, to manifest all that he has conceived in his consciousness. So consciousness now flows with his power, and by his power manifests, becomes, unfolds, develops, etc. This flow of his power, when he concentrates and releases his power, is his Shakti, his energy. But it is himself as energy. As he conceives, it is his conceiving, perceiving, static aspect, one could say. And as he flows with his energy, it is his dynamic aspect, his Shakti, his energy, himself as conscious force that we call the Divine Mother. So Ishvara, the Lord, and Aishwaryam is the natural flowing out of his energy, which obeys his will. And this is the divine nature, the divine Shakti, the divine power, the divine mother in the highest, flowing down to become the divine nature. And then eventually, as her consciousness flows into lower and lower gradations of substance, fragments to become what we call lower nature or eventually unconscious nature. So if you see top down, the divine will automatically expressed by the divine power, which is the divine Mother, the divine Shakti, flows into divine nature, and from divine nature flows into lower, less divine, or even unconscious nature. This movement is the highest operation of Aishwaryam. That is why it is Ishvara and Aishwaryam, Lord and Lordship flowing. And so the highest power of Aishwaryam is the Divine Mother, spiritually. When we open to her, it is his power expressing his will in and through and as the Divine Mother that flows into us and operates and expresses in us. So you can see the function of the Divine Mother or the divine energy to fulfill the will. Now, if you understand this, and now you understand why the name Aishwaryam is used to describe this in its highest, you understand also how the same thing replicates on a physical level. In this case, the mother pouring her energy through an instrument. I took the example earlier of pranab for a particular thing. Or as I mentioned last time, for the music, she used Sunil. For the paintings, she used Huta. For other things in the ashram, in the administration, in the knowledge, in the workings, there were others. So if you look at her as the primary Aishwaryam power, operating through individuals, flowing through, let's say, a dozen or 20, 100 maybe, each is as if a branching out of a special facet and aspect of her Aishwaryam, of her power. And to the extent the person is opening as an instrument, she works in and through him and executes. Here you get a glimpse of the way Sri Aurobindo and the mother worked, not only in the formation of the ashram, not only for the sadhana of the individuals, but through them upon the world. So you may not realize it, but this particular individual who's partially or in a specific aspect an instrument of the mother, maybe even a defective instrument, but still an instrument or a partial instrument. Through him, she is working on the world for a particular outcome that is easy to operate through him. And increasingly, as larger numbers of people would open through each one of those centers of opening and receptivity of consciousness, her force flows into the world and operates to fulfill the divine will. So she becomes the bridge between the divine will above and the working of all the functions in the world, but in her working as the spiritual Shakti, and then through nature, higher nature and lower nature, and all the way down. Of course, as you go lower down, it operates despite resistance, but takes longer by working around the problem and eventually penetrating through a longer process. Where it's open, flows directly, immediately, and this operation still continues. To the extent we choose to be conscious instruments, that working still continues. And so really the deeper understanding of this Aishwaryam you will appreciate from this. But on a in a very limited way, the same thing can operate in a smaller focal space. I'll give an example of this. In this case, for example, if Pranab was not there as an instrument, what she did through him would have been relatively limited in scope, using many others. When Pranab became more and more unwell, he stopped coming to the grounds, or he came less and less. I noticed something interesting. There were certain individuals through whom that energy would flow. So they became as if like repeater stations, if I may use an analogy, which is not perhaps the best, but helps to appreciate for the modern mind. You know, you have a Wi-Fi broadcaster, and where the Wi-Fi signal is weak, you put a repeater. The repeater picks up the signal and rebroadcasts it, amplifying it. And you can have a chain of repeaters even eventually. Something like that, where some action was required, and this person was very close, receptive, open, almost like a disciple of Pranab. And through him, something of that force would flow. And I noticed this happening. It was fascinating to see that. Not all of them were conscious. Not all of them were as good, effective as instruments, but to the extent they were, the action was there. So I was wondering what would happen when he withdrew, whether those people would become focal points for that force. I believe it could have been so. It can still be so. Some of them are still, but not so because they were not so conscious. Perhaps that effect has not been so strong, but it's still there to the extent that they have been open. But it brings us to a very interesting concept, which you will see in many spiritual spaces. But there's a person who holds the ideal or even the spiritual consciousness of the lineage or of the teaching. And then there is one or more individuals through whom that flows in the manifestation. We have in India the vocabulary, we say so and so is the Shakti, or there can be more than one focal points through which that energy flows, and they are called Shakti of this person who holds. And so this is an interesting idea that when there is an effective receptive instrument with a very developed skilled capacity, he or she can become a Shakti for the operation, for the expression, for the amplification of the action on a material domain, which comes from the one who holds the consciousness or the experience. And I saw this, again, I come back to the example of Jaya Mitra. She had this ability, and she was an exceptional Shakti to the extent that people gave her the chance, she could just flow and do extraordinary work. All of us, in a sense, would become focal points for the divine's working and for the divine mother's working through us. So I'm putting it in this broad context, but you understand how the thing works. I'm going to take up a few comments and questions which have come before proceeding. We have not yet looked at the text today. I think we'll keep the text for later. We'll just look at a few questions because keeping on the topic overall. Nikhil wrote last time in the chat box, my wishes will be operative with retrospective effect. Now, this is an interesting point it raises, and I wanted to elaborate a little bit on this. Remember what we spoke about when you're exercising a will for any particular outcome, and it can be in the nature of one of the lower operations of Aishwaryam, or even Vashita or Ishita, even if you have a need and you aspire intensely for the need, but not the particular will on the circumstances. But it always puts out a force. Remember what I said earlier, sometimes there are different parts in us pulling and pushing in different directions. Let's say while you were in school years, you had a very strong aspiration or a strong will for a particular thing that you wanted to experience or you wished that could happen, etc. Sometimes negative. You are so fed up with someone, you say, I wish that person got out of my life. Or sometimes even with children, I wish that person would just die and leave me in peace. It's done in ignorance, but sometimes it can be persistent. It releases a force. And then it happens. But it may not happen immediately. It may not happen in a year or two. It may happen after many years. So you say, I wish I could have such and such a thing. And maybe 10 years later, that thing comes to you. You say, where did this come from? I don't need it. But you'd forgotten that you'd put a very strong wish and call 10 years ago, perhaps, in ignorance. And that was still hanging around and came back to you in some way. So there's an interesting aspect to the energies put out or the will put out. We're not speaking here on a spiritual level, but purely material, vital, emotional, energetic levels. And what can often happen is something that you have released comes with a delay. Again, I'll share an example of a businessman who was in negotiation. And these are things I've heard from many people because I tended to always discuss with them on deeper levels. So this person explained how he would often, as part of his business, put out strong intentions. Long before he will have a meeting with somebody, he'll put a strong formation to a particular outcome, to shaping their thoughts, etc. Even before meeting them sometimes, to change their opinion, to change their outlook, he would put strong energies. What he said was, the meeting is over, the work is done. After a few weeks, sometimes after a few months, he felt that energy put out coming back to him as if tapping on him. Hey, I'm here, I'm here. So where is this coming from? And then he realized it's what he had put out at that time as a formation. It had come back to him because it had weakened and it came to him to draw energy from him. So one of the things which is taught in many of these traditions, in occult traditions, when they create formations or release formations for particular outcomes, that eventually the formation comes back to you. It's your consciousness, it comes back to you to draw upon your energy. If you have had a large number of desires, if you have a large number of intentions and wishes that you have strongly put out, all of these are somehow, in some sense, hanging around you and drawing on your energy. They need to continuously re-enliven themselves and they become drains of energy. Sometimes they have consequence, but at a time when you don't want that consequence. But they've just found a way to actualize. Let's just give an example. How it can be. This I'm making up. It's not something I've seen, but the equivalent forms you'll see. You say, I want so-and-so person to say no to this situation. So you put a strong intention that person should refuse. Maybe it's to your advantage that he refuses somebody else's offer. That intention that he should say no is still hanging around. The event is over. Next time you go to him or your person with your interest goes and he says no, it's actually the no that you had pushed for that other objective, which is now fulfilling itself through him because it found a chance to exercise itself. Do you realize how complex it can be? When you put out formations, the formations do not concern themselves with your overall aim unless that was part of the formation. The overall aim is well beyond the formation is a very narrow thing. I want him to say no to this person. And now this person is in my employ or whatever. And he says, no, the formation has fulfilled itself, but to my detriment. So what you don't realize is so much of the intentions, wills, desires that we throw out are actually coming back to us, fulfilling themselves, but in contradiction to our need much later on. So what he was experiencing was this thing coming to him later, and he realized that it was actually sucking energy, and he had to make a conscious choice to dissolve it. Think about how this works. If you are in the domain where you want to experiment with these things, be conscious of this and know to dissolve, or know when you say, all right, now this work is done, withdraw, so to say, that energy or that intention. Now this is no more required, and dissolve the intention. Especially if you have done it consciously, it's a good thing to consciously dissolve it also. Otherwise, you can be with a large clutter of many self-contradictory wills and desires that end up hampering themselves mutually. So I'm taking the question from Nikhil as a starting point for this. Sushma has sent a message. For many who asked how to send questions, you can of course put in the chat box during the live session, but if you want to send afterwards, you can send on the email integralstudies.in@gmail.com. I'll put it in the description box. So Sushma sent a comment. I have done something called hypnobirthing. During the births of both of my children, I listened to tracks with suggestions of relax, peace, calm, and how my body and my baby are working together to give a peaceful birth. So it's a kind of hypnosis, but you're choosing consciously to put the suggestion in. And by repetition, by opening yourself, you're allowing this suggestion to seep into the biology and even to the child itself. So nothing I wouldn't want to be there when I'm fully conscious. So she's chosen the suggestions as she would want. I've had the easiest, most peaceful births and home water birth with my second. And of course, had Sri Aurobindo and mother's picture in front of me while giving birth and felt their protection throughout. But definitely liked using this tool. So this is from Sushma. It's a suggestion how one can use this kind of what it would characterize as self-hypnosis or suggestion. But you could also amplify this by consciously opening to the higher help and let the spiritual force flow in and with and through the suggestion itself. Somebody called A had put this comment or question. Are viral trends on social media used as experiments in mass hypnosis? The origin of social media is perhaps the DARPA project LifeLog that evolved to Facebook and seems to indicate a weaponization of this power for mass control. Yes, this is correct. In fact, I've mentioned this earlier when we spoke of current affairs in the first few, where I was trying to set the broader context to understand current affairs, that there is actually an agenda to hypnotize the masses. It's not a new agenda. It's been going on for centuries. It's always been convenient for those in power to keep the common people hypnotized. In the Roman spaces, they had games. When people became too restive, they would have what they called games. And the games were also crude, corresponding to the character of the people. You had fighters, human beings fighting human beings fighting animals, being eaten up by lions, and all kinds of things. And this was called game. So you distract people with entertainment. So if Marx made a comment that religion is the drug of the masses, maybe in a certain context, but at least in Europe, that was the case to a large extent, not so much in India or other places, because the spiritual content was still strong in India. But the same statement could be repurposed to say social media is the drug of the masses. And yes, it has been used, it has been weaponized, it is meant to keep you hypnotized. It's a common experience today. I think you're seeing this everywhere in the world. You see people at home sitting together while having food, lunchtime, dinner time, and you have your mobile phone and everyone's looking at their mobile phone while eating. Or you see people on the road. Sometimes we see that tourists who come to the ashram, they're sitting in a row on the footpath, all of them watching their mobile phones, something on social media. What are they watching? Utter junk. Maybe it's entertaining junk, but it is junk. And watch their eyes, not blinking, pupils dilated, they are in hypnosis. Consider how many hours you spend on social media and under a state of hypnosis. Consider what is the kind of content that is being poured into you in that state of hypnosis. And then you realize what's being done to you, how your behavior is being shaped, and the very things you have seen there pop up from within you as your own impulses, desires, needs. And that's how they're shaping you. So there's a huge collective program to prepare you for certain outcomes. When those outcomes happen, you say, ah, yes, of course, this is how it's supposed to be, and you completely flow with it. As if a post-hypnotic suggestion given to you, do this, buy this, don't do that, avoid this. And you'll see this, it's a very interesting evidence. When you tell the person, actually, this is not true, it's the opposite, and you give evidence to the contrary, they look at you, they're surprised, and then their eyes glaze over and they turn away or they change the subject. That's a post-hypnotic suggestion operating in you. Not to look, don't think about this, don't. And it's shaping your behavior in a way that you do not even remember what was told to you that you did not like, where you have cognitive dissonance or evidence which is the very opposite of what you have been programmed to believe. And the evidence is so powerful, you don't accept because of this dissonance, and you flip and move into the post-hypnotic suggestion. So yes, this is a very powerful tool. Right now, large mass of humanity is fully under this kind of influence. I'll give an example. Some of this is just, it's not even just about controlling for manipulating you for cabal interests. It's just controlling you for becoming a good, loyal purchaser of a certain brand of products. So you'll see, for example, recently, there was one news item naming an individual who had created a software for purpose of matchmaking and dating. And now this person has announced a new software for same purpose of matchmaking and dating using AI, which is so powerful. It is so amazing. We have done the research. It is exceptional. And it's going to be released after 2 or 3 months, I think October or November. Why are they talking about it now? The programming has started. So they're telling you this is going to be amazing. Then there'll be another news item which will say, this you must have. The thing you're missing in your life, this is the solution for it. And the programming goes. When actually it is released, you will have a rush of articles with people saying, oh, how they found the right match using the software. You'll have a movie in which the hero or heroine will use the software or refer to it as the solution for their problems. And at that point, when you listen to all this or watch all this, and all this will be part of the what they call viral posts, you'll say, ah, yes, of course, I knew that. I know about this. I'm very familiar with this. You've never seen it, but you're familiar with it. And they built that familiarity. They built a brand loyalty. And for you, the next time you have a particular need for that, that name, that image will pop up. I just took this example because it came up a few days ago. It was fresh in my mind, but you do that for any food product or any other thing that needs to be sold. That's how they build your brand loyalty without you ever having touched the brand. And often cinema is used for the same objective. But AI has used this word, viral trends on social media. Yes. What makes a thing viral? So they had many movies in which somebody had posted something and it became viral and it changed the world, it changed the society, it changed their situation, giving you the illusion that if you put up something which is genuinely worthwhile, it will become viral. And what do they mean by viral? Suddenly everybody says it's so interesting. They share with others, who share with others, who share with others, and suddenly millions of people are watching it or have watched it, or now being told that millions have watched it, so you should watch it. Now, if you look at this whole psychology, the trend is millions of people have said this is worthwhile. You must see it. So you imitate. Knowing this, The trick that they play is they artificially make it viral. Now, the decision is made at a certain level in the social media operations. This messaging we want to put. So they'll have 2 or 3 people push some videos with that messaging. They'll observe which is catching on better. Okay, this one seems to be more effective with people. Pick that and then choose to put it on the automatic feed of 1 million people or 100 million. Just like that, by choosing it, it suddenly pops up in your what is called feed. They're feeding you. So it pops up on the feed. And you naturally watch it because you just opened and this thing popped up. And they can truthfully say 1 million people watched it or 100 million people watched it. It's gone viral. They made it go viral. None of these things by itself ever goes to viral level for millions. When they push it to millions and call it viral, then they push it to you justifiably saying it has gone viral, now you need to watch it. But it's a self-serving prophecy, or they have actually formed the virality of it for a particular goal. Or the reverse, when they see a trend line for something happening which is contrary to their agenda, they will deliberately pull it out and hide it so that it does not get promoted and de-emphasize. And this whole technology of how you pick, what you promote, what you don't promote, initially it was done by people, now it's done by AI that they have programmed for certain keywords or key ideas. And that's part of the whole goal of the mass hypnosis and mass influence. One of the things which happens with cinema, because you're in a hypnotized state, you drink it as if it's yours, and then it pops up as your own desire, your own idea. So it's easy to shape human behavior I'll give an example. I shared this with a friend recently, some time back. I said, look at your idea of breakfast. Picture you having breakfast and your ideal breakfast. Let's say you're on it's a Sunday or you're on holiday. You're completely free to do as you want. What do you see yourself doing? And very likely there's an image of you in your morning clothes, or perhaps you've just woken up from sleep and you're in your night clothes. You're sitting, sipping tea. Maybe depending on you, it might be in bed or sitting. You're sipping tea and you have the newspaper in front and you're reading and you're eating something. Very likely there's an image, something in this direction. Where did this come from? Where in your actual culture, I would speak, let's say at least in India, would this be normal? And the only way it is normal for you is the images shown in advertising or in cinema. And the first thing you do to read newspaper is putting yourself in the programming of what you should be afraid of, what should be worried of, what you should be happy about. That's what's being told to you. You do not find yourself in the morning getting up, for example, sitting in front of doing a prayer or doing your morning exercise of Surya Namaskar. That's not the image that comes. Nowhere in the cinema have you been shown this. And notice how many of what seems like your normal response is actually a reflection of what was seen in cinema. One of the most pernicious influences you see in India coming through Hollywood cinema is this idea of prom, which was popularized in Hollywood cinema, that at the last day of the year, you have to go with somebody who is like a partner to you and have sex. Prom night. And there's movies dedicated to girls or boys desperate who are unable to. And finally, the culmination of the movie is they succeed in having sex. Why it has to be on prom night? No, well, that's the culture. You're being told that's normal. That's how you should do it. And you see that trend popping up in India. And just from those movies, nothing else. It's not part of your indigenous culture. It's not part of your value system. It's nowhere in your family. But once that has embedded in you, the next generation, you will say, that's our family tradition because your parents just did it. And this is being done the same way with alcohol. You see so many movies today, all movies which show alcohol. You'll see the person, they're stressed. Somebody says, here, have this. Take it easy and relax. The suggestion is taking alcohol will make you relax and feel easy. And the picture shown at the point, always watch when the camera zooms closely. When it zooms closely, that's when the programming is most intense. When it moves away, it's telling you in the programming, this is distancing from you. So you see how the camera work itself indicates to you what you're being programmed for, both positively and negatively. And when it zooms, and then it shows the person taking a swig, the thing has barely been swallowed. It's not even gone into bloodstream. Instantly, the person relaxes, smiles, and becomes happy. So did the alcohol do it? No, it did not. Because by the time it hits your system, it's going to take time. It's the programming. And the programming that I've taken the alcohol, now, according to programming, I should smile and relax. So I had somebody, we were talking in one of these meetings because it was mostly people coming from a spiritual background. So some people were commenting about the alcohol. And there was this person who had come from a mixed background. And he says, what's wrong with alcohol? I enjoy my behavior. I enjoy my beer every evening. And I looked at his face. There was no enjoyment. The key word associated, enjoy your beer. They give you the thing, they'll say, enjoy, as they place the glass before. So you're being programmed to associate the word enjoy with this. And the result is, you tell yourself, I'm enjoying. Where is the enjoyment? Not really. So observe how this works, observe how the programming is, and observe how pernicious the patterns you see on Hollywood cinema generally are everywhere in the world. There's a flattening of culture, values, behavior patterns, which is largely a replica of what is in the cinema. Yes, so it's a huge mass hypnosis operation ongoing. I'll just look at the chat box now. Nikhil is asking, by which Siddhi or yoga can we be conscious in our subtle body? You see, the one Siddhi, I won't even use the word Siddhi, the faculty, power which you have is this of knowledge, Vyapti, Prakamya. What you become conscious in yourself, in a sense, is in the Vyapti is the consciousness in identity. So I maybe extend the question a little bit. This was again a conversation I had. Somebody asked, what is the difference between empathy and sympathy? Because I kept using the word empathy when speaking of Vyapti, where you feel the experience of others in yourself coming in or as identified with. I use the word empathy. So there's a difference. Sympathy is when you resonate with somebody else's feelings. So somebody is sad and you sympathize with them. You say, oh, I'm so sorry that you're sad. I feel bad that you're sad. You're not feeling their sadness as sadness. You are responding to it by a vibration which is supportive. So that's a sympathetic response, sympathy. Empathy is when you feel their experience as your own. I feel sad. I share in your sadness. That's an empathic response. The problem with empathy is often that you cannot distinguish between your experience and theirs. So people who are naturally empathic have a problem. When they feel strongly this infusion of somebody else's state into them, they can't make out which is theirs and which is the other person's. Being with you, I am overwhelmed with depression or sadness, and I feel as if I am sad. I don't know why. And then the person says, oh yeah, I just had read this and I was miserable with this news. But I'm sharing in your sadness and misery because of the identity. The problem with empaths, if we may use such a term, is that you cannot distinguish between your state and somebody else's state. It's a problem because you are doing it helplessly. You need to build the boundaries of separation to isolate yourself. And then you can feel the thing entering and then make a choice to accept or not. So I digressed a little bit, but I'm coming to the question now. In your own consciousness, you can feel parts, states within you. If I had to, I wouldn't connect it to Siddhis, but if you had to artificially force it, you'll say your hand feels something. Your mind consciousness identifies with the hand and feels what the hand feels in a way, isn't it? It's a form of yapti. But let's not exaggerate beyond a point. You don't need a special siddhi. It's rather a question of directing your awareness to becoming conscious of the subtle layer within you. But the siddhi is useful when somebody with the capacity or the experience now imprints it in you or leads you to it. And because they are there, there is the influence of yapti, where there's a transmission of experience, where it's easy for you to catch that experience. There's an exercise which I will suggest, which I have recommended before, with the exercise of the descent of peace. When you feel that, and you feel it filling you, but also extending around you. And that's when you become conscious of the subtle layer of your body, of the subtle body. And then once you feel that around you, hold that awareness and then build on it. And that's one of the easiest ways in which you can do that. So there's the couple of videos, guided meditations, which are on the website. You can just search for the keyword meditation and you will find some of them. There's one in particular, I did not know it was on, it was not intended to be put on, where there's an exercise of feeling the extension of the subtle body from the finger and the contact with that. So if you can find it, you will find it helpful for this. Joanne says, yes, this definitely works. I work with a woman who has early onset Alzheimer's. She has no filter. She can barely speak. I can feel her and she can feel me. She literally feels me. I play. So I think this is with regard to the identity of consciousness. And yes, one can communicate in this way. It's also the way you will use even with Vyapti in relation to animals and also communicate, which we have discussed before. Jose asks, as we develop the Siddhi, do we also develop the ability or immunity to be targeted from lower influence from others applying the same Siddhi? So I would suggest that this happens more when you grow in consciousness. You don't need to develop that Siddhi to be able to be immune to it. You don't need to, for example, be able to influence somebody else in order to be immune from other people's influence. If you're simply aware of your state, you will feel when somebody else's energy or state enters. You remember Sri Aurobindo's description of Vyapti is the feeling of somebody's state entering, striking, hitting, entering. So first become aware in these parts in you. The moment you are aware, you'll feel the thing coming, building, at which point you will block, refuse to be shaped, affected by it. If the force is very strong, as in some of the examples I gave, you'll still feel it enter, you'll still feel it seize you, but you'll be aware that it's happening. And at that point, you'll have a choice to either walk away or make a choice not to make a decision at that point and simply say, okay, I will get back to you after a few days. I need to think about it. Avoid making a decision when you're suffused with that influence. At least you'll have the choice if you persist in this. But in time, you learn to build the boundary and refuse. So this is what I will say in continuation of that word empath. And the problem of empaths is you don't know the difference between somebody else's state and yours. So build this awareness, observe, especially like a boundary around you where you feel your awareness, state of awareness, state of emotion, state of thought, outlook. When you hold this as a boundary, you'll feel the thing entering. It does not enter your physical body, it enters your psychological space around. That's this cocoon of your personal space. You feel it entering there. And that's when you have to refuse. If it's got in, then you're already largely under its influence. But there you can put a will and block it, refuse its entry. Because you're feeling the awareness of the thing entering, you have the equivalent power of also refusing, blocking it right there. Observe this and start exercising this. But for this, the first step is become aware of your internal state. The problem most people have is they're not conscious of what's happening inside them. They're only conscious of what is happening outside them. So especially if you're going to enter a difficult space, practice this becoming aware of your internal state. Before you enter the difficult space where you're going to have these interactions, become aware of your state. If possible, lift yourself to your highest state. Always a higher state has greater freedom than a lesser state. So if you recall, when I gave certain examples of these businessmen, one of them I said, who was always reaching out at a lower level, he would pull people at a lower level with sexual jokes and then hook into them, because then you are easy to seize. You're already in an energy which is sticky. Then he could grab. But if you're on a higher grade, it didn't work. His attempt could not hook into you and you would not be influenced. The person who is on a higher grade may still influence you with a higher ideal, but then it's need not be contradictory. You may have a higher ideal which is shared. You may still differ on the means of execution, but you may have commonality on higher levels. So placing yourself on a higher level would make you immune. Becoming conscious within you and then refusing and blocking would make you immune. It doesn't mean you need to develop the ability to influence others. That's not required. So I would even recommend first build this awareness, build in you the ability to also shift consciously on a higher level. Suppose someone has pulled you on a lower grade of response by whatever interaction. You realize, oh, they're playing with your state, consciously shift. The nature of emotions is they tend to be sticky. The nature of thought, especially higher thought and non-emotional thought, is that it tends to be more free and clear. Shift yourself consciously into thought out of the emotion state. Notice how certain spaces are designed to pull you into a certain state, and then they influence you. So especially if you're going for a business negotiation, watch what they do. They first give you food, they give you drinks. They operate, the first discussion they have, oh, let's get to know each other, build commonality, but also what grade of commonality, observe. Notice where they pull you, push you state-wise. And then suddenly, when they feel you are now sufficiently soft, they seize you and grab you. I remember this happened again in a negotiation relatively recently. So I must say I'm not still very much immune to the skilled types. Now this man, he had to negotiate with me for something. He sat with me and straight away started speaking of his loyalty to the mother and why this thing was important. And I naturally relaxed, opened. Seems like we're with sadhaks. And when he found he had softened me sufficiently, suddenly he went for whap, this, grab. And before I could say anything, I found I had agreed. Before I could take the moment, it caught me by surprise. So be careful, you learn by observing. But if you're not observant, you won't know what happens. You won't know the games people play. So then after subsequent to this, I realize now every time somebody starts this kind of discussion and we are going to negotiate, if they start like this, I have to be careful. Don't fall into their trap. They use these words. They use these things to put you in a certain state. Again, I'll give you a skilled businessman. I've seen a businessman who had developed this ability so powerfully. I'll tell you what he was doing. He would tell you, please tell me an incident with the mother. Okay, if you have not had directly, you say, tell me an incident which moves you. You start narrating. The moment you're narrating, you are entering that state, obviously. He watches you. At the moment when he feels you are in the peak, he would reach out and touch your arm and say, isn't that so wonderful? And then pop in his phrase which he wanted. Now it's like I'm best friend with you, or whatever he wanted to project as his hypnotic suggestion. He touches you and the energy flow which comes, and he's put you in the state and he's building the link or convincing you. And I remember this, so he was doing this. I was observing. For me, it was all new at that time. This is some 25 years ago. It was still very new. I had not understood how this works. I was observing carefully. And then he was shaping me. And I noticed he had been building for 2 or 3 days. And I suddenly brought it to a point where he said, I want you to do this. And something in me at that point had already detached sufficiently that I could say no. I said, I respect what you want, but I have to say no here. And for him, it was a shock because he was so sure he had got me to that point. But I'm showing you that even they will use all the keywords of your aspiration and your higher things to play with you. So, so Rampal is saying, I assume Aishwarya and Vashita can operate at the same time. In practice, all these blend into each other. So it's difficult to distinguish. You're operating, see, Vyapti, for example, is the basis for operation of many of these things, isn't it? So you're always using, and there's always one which is blending into another. The distinctions are useful more to understand and categorize the differences in the operation, or perhaps in the form of training initially. But more and more they will blend, and particularly when you look at the whole thing as a natural expression of the self, as power of the self, it is just one flowing influence. Self knows in identity and exercises its will in identity. State of self's flow of consciousness is the natural Aishwarya. Self itself is the most powerful, seductive influence there is, and it has the most powerful, compelling Vashita. And it is spontaneous and effortless. So it is the Ishita which takes place in its highest way. If you think in these terms, the distinction between these becomes irrelevant almost. The distinction is more in which part operates in the mind, in the emotional centers, whether there's an active focus of the will or a spontaneous exercise without an active will. Those are the distinctions. Otherwise, if you look at it more deeply, they blend. Jose says, I recognize there's strong vital energies that have a sticky energy that try to influence from their level and take effort to neutralize and purify in the personal field. How do we protect our field? I suppose you're speaking of somebody else's sticky energy entering into you. In that case, simply observe that the energy is able to hook you in the parts where you have the similar corresponding stickiness of energy. That's your key. If you are living in that grade and somebody else puts out their sticky energy, it glues. If you shift out of that lower vital zone, let's say, into a higher vital or more mentalized vital, let's say, generally, where the mental influence is dominating the vital, this sticky thing comes, you may even feel it trying to nudge you, pull you, push you, but it cannot get a grip. You can feel stirrings at best, but that's about all. Or it may grip you, but still you are free of the grip. And you can say, I see this push within me compelling me to accept, but I can choose freely to say no. If from here you've been pulled down, then you lose. But if you stay here, you'll find you can maintain your immunity quite easily. So I would rather recommend you become conscious of the equivalent grade within you and free yourself from it. Now, there are two things. Long term, you will purify that grade itself so that it does not become sticky. It becomes clear and lit up, although of a denser grade of the vital. The lower vital itself is an instrument and a powerful instrument, but purified. Long term, you'll work in that. Short term, you will move out of that grade into your highest, higher or inner. Your freedom is always in the higher, or if you go deeper in the inner. Initially, the inner is not the best for you because this is something which I found initially would happen. I would go deep within. I was in the part where I was unaffected by that thing, but the outer parts were disconnected from me. I could not compel them, and they could still be sometimes swayed. So because there's a gap between the inner influence and this outer part, which is not sufficiently integrated right now. Maybe that's not the best poise. You take a poise above in the mind space where you can still assert on the lower part within you to make a no. Observe what works. As you play with it, you'll develop your poise, which is most immune. In time, though, you can also exercise the third option, which is to create this boundary around you, where you refuse the entry of that thing. But that can happen only when there's a sufficient degree of purification in you that there is not the correspondence resonance. I give an example. This guy comes to you raging with violent anger. They throw at you the anger. I've had this happen. The person is there. They're throwing it at me. I know they're throwing it at me and I'm trying to resist. But eventually, something gets in and pops up and there's a strong response. And I know it's not mine. It's their energy coming back. And I couldn't avoid it. It happened a few times. And I said, okay, I need situations where I have to practice resisting it. Each time it happened, it was a surprise. I didn't have occasion to be able to practice. So in time, I'm saying you will build the ability to sense this entering and refuse, block it. To the extent that part in you is sufficiently purified, you'll be able to refuse more easily. But even if not fully purified, as you build the boundary on that level, you will be able to reject. Shanta, how to dissolve our own formations? How does one explain that? The same way as you formed them. You notice you concentrated for a purpose. I want this outcome to happen. Notice that there's a certain energy that is still there after you have wished it, willed it. Feel that energy. And then you, as if take that energy in your awareness. You don't have to move your hands, but I'm showing with gesture. It's as if you take in your consciousness and say, all right, and now this work is done. It's no more needed. And you make a choice to dissolve it or offer it and dissolve it to be released. That's all. It's just a movement of consciousness or of intention. Or if you can't feel the energy, simply say, well, I've wished for it a long time. Now this is done. Now I choose to wish that this energy is no more required. This intention is resolved. Just as an intention you can do. But if you can feel it, then it's the most complete dissolution. You'll often feel it in you, this part which wants that still. The thing is done, but still that thing needing, wanting, it's somewhere there. And you can dissolve from there. All right, this is done now. You can take it easy. Otherwise, these things tend to build up in you, and it's part of the reasons why we often have stresses. For work already accomplished, the stress still remains because the tension which you used to build for that work is still present. And you have to relax and say, done. No more required. Vaijayanti says, can Siddhi be used for works such as deciphering Indus Valley script? Why is nobody with Siddhi has tried to decipher it? Yes, you can use Siddhis for specific knowledge. In this case, if you have to decipher the Indus Valley script, okay, you or any script, what would you do? Remember the identification of consciousness, receiving consciousness, knowledge in identity, which is the operations of Vyapti or Prakamya. In this case, if you could, you would go into that space or you would hold the seals and try to feel the people who used those seals. Try to enter in identity with their consciousness more and more. Feel their mind state. Feel their value system in that identity. And then from there, you would look at the text and see what was the intention here placed. That would be these siddhis at least. There are other siddhis which we have not touched here, which is one of them, we have not put it as siddhi. They are Trikal Drishti, which we will discuss in a couple of sessions later, which is part of this third limb of the yoga. In the Trikala Drishti, you would have knowledge of the past and the future. That would be more easily operative for this work. You would take the seals. You could, of course, identify with the consciousness of the people, but you would actually look at what they were used for, who did it, for what, and what was the nature of that knowledge or the language itself and the way it was pronounced. You could have actual full scenes in 3D of those experiences of being there as if even seeing it happen before you. So these are things one could do as a power or a siddhi to gain any knowledge of the past, any archaeological knowledge, any knowledge of any kind for that matter, once you're able to access this. By extension, entering into the Akashic records, as is popularly known, you would have full knowledge of any event of the past or tendencies of the future even. So That's something which will be of a different grade of access to knowledge. But eventually, it is still in that state by this power of Vyapti or Prakamya that you would have the real knowledge of experience of the people of that age. Rampal is asking, are all these siddhis from the subliminal plane? I won't use the word subliminal plane, subliminal layer within. It's not one plane, it could be many planes. All these siddhis are already operating in us fragmentarily in the subliminal layers, where they are already available naturally to that grade of consciousness. Their development is their organization in your more superficial surface layers. Or as you grow into the inner awareness in inner ranges of consciousness, you become aware of that functioning which was already there. I give an example of how this works often. Something happens, it catches you by surprise. And then after that, you look back and you notice that since the morning, or an hour before, or even a few minutes before, something within you already was rising with a certain suggestion, with a certain anticipation. You were not paying attention to it. You were not actively conscious in your surface part, but it was already rising. Then this thing happens, which surprises you. At that point, you look back and you notice this thing was there already, but you just were not paying attention to it. Observe this. This is happening to us all the time. So I'll put it in different terms. When something happens, look for the part in you where you already sensed it would happen, or where you already knew it would happen. Look for that part. It's already there in you. That's how you'll become conscious increasingly. And the next time when it happens, you'll notice that part activating and say, I need to see what is it indicating. Rajesh is asking, can another solution of dealing with unwanted empathic influences be to open to the Divine Mother from the lower poise that you're drawn into? Yes, you can do that. But as you have not developed that purity in that layer, you may still be seized by the nature of the pull and push. As long as you're in the layer which is innately sticky, the compulsion will also be strong on you. So opening to the Divine Mother there, because that part is already not so receptive, will be very limited in its outcome. Instead, you shift to a higher grade, which is clear, free. There you open, and from there you infuse that influence in the lower part if you want. It's always easier to bring the higher influence top down and infuse into the lower, rather than going into the lower and calling for it in times of crisis. In times of crisis, you go up and infuse from above, which is easier. When you don't have a crisis, you can do the exercise of opening from below, and that will help to purify. But you can't do that in the crisis time. Of course, if you already find yourself thrown into that state, you do what you can. Mahesh is saying, I have examples at my workspace where the guy is writing code so inspired that it almost seems from another plane, but their behavior outside of coding is very crass, diametrically opposite. Yes. This is an example of people in whom one part is highly developed, even open to higher intuitive influence, some part of the mind, some layer of mind, or in a particular functioning of the mind, as in coding or some kind of writing. They drop out of that, and the rest of their consciousness is very crude, coarse, lower, and there's no link between these two. A beautiful writer, inspired writer, can drop into a very crude behavior when he comes out of that state, and nothing in between might have been built, for example. It's possible. Sumana is asking, could a collective Ishita, Vashita be effective to turn the current world situation into the positive divine direction? Yes, but I would simply say it is the aspiration and the effort that you make to change. Yes, of course, it will make a huge difference. If also collectively you invoke, you make a prayer, you receive a higher, that would be helpful. Okay, so I come to, we have run out of time, but there's still a few questions from earlier, which I'll take one. Riyadh has commented, my intuition seems to be mixed almost always with distortions, like me wanting to have the correct intuition. So this is an anxiety which you have when you're trying to develop or open to higher intuition, when you're trying to purify your receptivity of any of these workings of the inner or higher ranges. That itself, the anxiety tends to be a disturbance, which is why you go back to the sequence. The first limb of the integral yoga, equality and peace, as complete, as perfect as you can. Second, open to the divine Shakti with faith and various other facets of amplification of the energy and power of the divine working in you. And then we come to the third. So if you do have to practice and you want to do it consciously as a practice, let's say to develop your intuition, you're going to sit down and open to and do an exercise of writing poetry, for example, or whatever else. Follow this sequence. First, bring yourself into a poise of deep peace and equality. Peace to equality is easier than equality to peace. So invoke the peace, feel that, settle it, infuse it in all the parts as much as you can, and then lean back into stillness and equality from there. And then consciously make the equality as perfect as you can, meaning I'm equal to whatever the outcome. It works, it doesn't work, I don't mind. I will just open myself and do the best that is required in terms of aspiration with stillness, without expectation or anxiety of expectation. Make this as complete as possible. Then you go to the second equivalent of the second limb, in this case would be to open, to receive, to whatever degree you can, or rise into and receive in a descent. And then move into the actual process that you're going to do. Maybe in this case, write a poem or do an exercise or whatever activity you do, or engage with the discussion, whatever it is. So I would correct Riyadh's statement and say, don't say my intuition seems to be mixed. No, your intuition is pure. The material in which you're receiving the intuition is mixed. Think of it in that term. See, then the problem is much simpler. It's within your capacity to correct. The intuition coming is true. Your reception is clouded. Build this or correct for this. And it's not much. It's not difficult in this case. So, I'll just complete with this question from Piyush. He says, I'm asking this question because I cannot generally feel the presence above the head. The question is it enough to hold a quiet will and aspiration and ask the mother to descend with her substance of peace in me? Will this be enough to feel the substance of peace settling down? Or do I have to realize the presence above the head necessarily? Well, the answer is obvious. You start with whatever is easiest for you. And from there you will grow. Yes, certainly, if it is easier for you to simply be in a state of quiet calm, in your head, open and invoke her to settle in you with this peace and substance of peace. If that's easier, just do that. As that happens, as this grows, the substance which descends, you will feel it descending. You'll feel the peace settling. Stay with it. But you'll notice that what has filled you also extends above. And you feel it above as if a large extension, of which this is a small descent. Hold that awareness, hold both. And then from there, automatically, as you feel the space above and the peace above, you might find yourself drawn up. Start always with whatever is easiest to make the contact with the divine presence, with the experience that you're seeking. Make the contact. Receive in you or allow yourself to be drawn, whichever way it goes. Let the contact form. Hold that, let that stabilize, and then there'll be naturally the extension of the experience in whichever direction it must. If you follow this basic guideline, you'll find everything becomes very easy and spontaneous in the sadhana, and that's the nature of the integral yoga. Arpan has asked, this is of interest to me as I am also a software engineer. What exactly were the characteristics that made his coding seem to be that of another plane? The opening to intuition. All of us tend to have a certain opening to intuition. For many, it may be for a specific activity in which you find most open. Otherwise, you consciously put yourself in that state. Again, same process. First, the stillness, peace, equality, then the opening to the Shakti and the descent of the Shakti in you, amplification of the presence. And then you turn to doing whatever you have to do. In that state, you'll find the intuition flows more easily. So if you want instructions, this is a easier starting point. Look also at the discussion we have had, I think in the evenings series, probably from just before the lockdown, we had done a series of 6 or 7, which were on intuition. It started with higher states of consciousness and then development of intuition. Look at that. It's based on the chapter, at least the development of intuition is based on the chapter called Intuitive Mind in the Synthesis of Yoga. But the practices associated with that and understanding of other intermediate gradations, that will also be helpful. Take a look at those talks. You'll find it useful. And Mahesh's question, as soul or psychic being takes on different bodies in different births to get different experiences, can these siddhis happen only in a birth chosen by the soul for experiencing it? Yes, it's possible that for a particular lifetime one develops certain faculties or capacities incidentally. You're an artist, you develop a certain facet of intuition in the art. Stops there, nothing more. In another lifetime, you do something totally different, and the art may or may not be even strong, the intuition may or may not come strongly. But for most of us, this life is one of integration of all things developed in the past, but also to break through into something greater towards the supramental realization and the supramental manifestation, which is the purpose and the intention in nature's leap. And we are all aligned to that in this lifetime. So forget about what has happened in the past or not. A sense of all that is available now, and it does not matter what is or is not available. You're free to open now to a higher action of the working of the Shakti within you. If in your mind there is this thinking, oh, it's going to take me 3 more lives, tell yourself this is the third of those lives. Why do you want to start always? When you say the work is going to take 3 or 4 lives, this is my first one in that sequence. No, this is my last one in that sequence. Tell yourself that. You have here with you the culmination of all the work done in the past. Start with that assumption. And then you have here the active support of the Divine Mother working in you, who already has everything that you need, who can infuse into you directly by her power of Aishwarya and Vyapti and the Vashita, even if necessary, to imprint in you directly whatever experience you need. And your role now is to consciously open and receive and develop the capacity to contain what you receive and integrate and make yours. That's all. Do not ever give yourself the thought that, oh, many more lives of continuation. No, this is the life which is the continuation of those many more lives already done, and start focusing on the outcome itself. Not with anxiety, but with joy, with this trust, with this child's trust opening itself to the Divine Mother with the certitude her capacity can do what you cannot, always. And let this be for us the reference in our relationship with the Divine Mother and in our relationship with the practice of the sadhana itself. Let's hold ourselves in this state and in this aspiration, in this faith and in this certitude. Namaste.